Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. We're on Season 19, Killer Pairs, where we're going to cover people who work together to murder. It could be family members, people involved in relationships, or just a couple of friends out doing some murdering. If you're entertained by these videos, hit like, subscribe, or leave me a comment. You can also check out my other channel, Somewhere Sinister, that's a little more history related. There's links in the description. In 1920s Chicago, crime was on the rise. It was mostly due to Prohibition creating a market for organized crime in the city. But in 1924, a pair of killers would commit what they considered to be the perfect crime. Unfortunately for them, their high level of intelligence did not benefit them like they thought, and they were soon caught, exposing the secret lives they had both been living. This is Monsters. Nathan Freudenthal Leopold Jr. was born on November 19, 1904 in Chicago, Illinois. He was the third son from a wealthy German Jewish immigrant family, with his father, Nathan Leopold Sr., having been a manufacturer of aluminum cans and paper products. The Leopolds resided in a mansion on Michigan Avenue, later moving to a spacious home in an affluent neighborhood. Nathan's childhood was marked by luxury and comfort, with nurses and governesses attending to his needs. His father worked long hours, and his mother, Florence, was often ill, so young Nathan spent much of his time under the care of household staff. Despite the presence of caretakers, Nathan maintained a close relationship with his parents, viewing them more as friends than authority figures. He was the youngest member of his extended family and was affectionately nicknamed Babe, a moniker that stuck with him for years. Nathan's intellectual prowess became evident at an astonishingly young age. His baby book recorded that he spoke his first words at just 4 months and 3 weeks old, hinting at his future academic success. As he grew older, his intellectual capabilities continued to astound those around him. At the age of 15, Nathan had begun his undergraduate studies at the University of Michigan. He later transferred to the University of Chicago, where he graduated at 18 with Pi Beta Kappa honors. His academic journey didn't stop there. He immediately enrolled in the university's law school, with plans to continue his studies at Harvard Law School after a trip to Europe. Nathan's linguistic abilities were particularly remarkable. He claimed to speak 5 languages fluently and had studied a total of 15. That mastery of languages began early, with German as his first language, quickly followed by English. His multilingual skills would later play a significant role in his academic pursuits and personal interests. Perhaps the most defining aspect of Nathan's early life was his passionate interest in ornithology. That fascination with birds began when he was just 6 years old, after a visit to the home of his father's friend Henry Cole, who had an extensive collection of taxidermied birds. By the age of 11, Nathan had started his own bird collection, which would eventually grow to include over 3,000 specimens, all that he had killed himself. Nathan's father had petitioned the city for his son to have a special permit to shoot birds in local parks. Of course, being the richest man in the city, they gave him what he wanted, and it was common for little Nathan to be walking around Chicago with a small rifle. He spent countless hours hiking through the woods and swamps around Chicago, observing and collecting birds. That hobby wasn't just a passing interest. Nathan achieved national recognition for his ornithological work. One of his most significant contributions was his study of the rare Kirtland's warbler. In the summer of 1923, Nathan traveled to northern Michigan to observe the birds in their natural habitat. His dedication to that research culminated in a paper he presented at the annual meeting of the American Ornithological Union in Boston later that year. Despite their wealth, Nathan's parents enrolled him at the local public school near his house. Nathan later recalled that he knew he was different from the other children there, and that the school was full of quote-unquote tough boys. He was regularly bullied by the other students, with them pushing him down and stealing his pocket change. He never told his parents about the bullying because he didn't expect them to help. His father was overly focused on business, being one of the wealthiest people in Chicago at the time. His mother had been diagnosed with kidney disease and mostly stayed in her bedroom. He wasn't particularly close to his older brothers, Foreman and Samuel, so they weren't there for him either. Eventually, the Leopold family moved to an even bigger house in Kenwood, and Nathan started attending the Harvard School for Boys, which is not related to the Ivy League school in Cambridge. Nathan hoped that he would fit in better at the school since the Kenwood area was home to more wealthy families, but he was still bullied. That was what encouraged Nathan to use his academic superiority to graduate from high school early and start attending college. Richard Albert Loeb was born on June 11, 1905, also in Chicago. He was the third of 4 sons born to Albert and Anna Loeb. Albert was a successful lawyer and the vice president of Sears Roebuck & Company, the largest mail-order business in the country at the time. Like Nathan, Richard was highly intelligent and skipped several grades. Like many wealthy families, the Loebs hired a governess to look after their children. Her name was Emily Struthers. Miss Struthers was hired to care for 3 of the boys, the youngest not having been born yet. But the older 2, Alan and Ernest, were already in school, so that meant she spent all day with Richard. She was extremely strict, and by the time he was in school, she prioritized study over play. She would ask his teachers for extra work for him, and he would spend his evenings studying while the other boys were out playing baseball or fishing. Richard would later say that he felt like he was Miss Struthers' prisoner, and he began to do what he could to skirt the rules. The governess's iron rule caused Richard to begin lying in order to obtain some freedom. That turned into lying to not get in trouble, and eventually it became something he enjoyed. One of the lies that Richard told Miss Struthers was about what he was reading at bedtime. She only allowed Richard to read what she considered literature of quality. One evening, Richard took a book from his brother's room that was a detective novel about a criminal who planned and executed elaborate robberies. He loved the book, and from then on he was hooked on mystery and crime novels. That led to Richard sneaking out and buying more crime novels and magazines. Then he began fantasizing about being a criminal, a master thief, a bank robber, and even an arsonist. He eventually started shoplifting. Nothing he actually needed, just doing it for the thrill. At the same time, when he was 12 years old, he was enrolled in University High School, a rigorous private prep school. Once there, Miss Struthers pushed the young boy to complete high school in only 2 years, which he did. Richard graduated from high school at the age of 14 and went on to be accepted at the University of Chicago. Miss Struthers was thrilled, but not long after, Anna Loeb told the woman that, now that Richard was in college, he no longer needed a governess. She disagreed, but Anna had made her decision. She wanted her to start looking after the newest member of the Loeb family, Tommy. Miss Struthers said that, if she wasn't going to work with Richard, she preferred to resign. Richard would later say that he believed that the governess caused him to hold back his deviant behavior, and after she left, he let loose. At 15, he started smoking and carrying a flask of alcohol with him. Of course, by that time in the U.S., alcohol had been completely prohibited, so Richard would accompany the older college students to underground speakeasies. Richard filled the flask he carried with him from an alcohol supply in his father's basement, which was illegally imported from Canada. Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb first crossed paths in the summer of 1920. Despite their different personalities, Richard was outgoing and sociable, while Nathan was more reserved and aloof. They found common ground in their intellectual pursuits. The two began taking out Nathan's Willie's night coupe and driving around Prohibition-era Chicago. It was a time that was prime for a couple of 15-year-olds to get into trouble. Crime families were taking over the city, nobody asked for ID at clubs, and you didn't even need a driver's license. There were many activities to interest the rebellious nature of Richard, and Nathan was just happy to do whatever his friend wanted to do. As Nathan and Richard spent more time together, their bond grew stronger. Nathan in particular developed an intense attraction to Richard. He was drawn to Richard's good looks and charm, describing him as, quote, slender but well-built, tall with brown blonde hair, humorous eyes, and a sudden attractive smile. Their relationship took a romantic turn in February of 1921 during a train ride to the Loeb family's vacation estate in Charlevoix, Michigan. In the privacy of their sleeper car, Nathan confessed that he had fantasized about being with men. At the time, homosexuality was illegal, and if Nathan's secret was revealed, it could lead to jail or a stay at a psychiatric facility where he could undergo aversion therapy or even receive a lobotomy. When Richard showed interest in what he had said, Nathan went on to describe going on dates with women in his youth and even having sex with a few, but that was just to hold up appearances. He told his friend that he had always been attracted to men. It doesn't seem like Richard had homosexual tendencies in his life by then, but he was thrilled to have the attention from Nathan. Richard had been showered with attention from Miss Struthers, and once she left, he hungered for that same attention from anyone he could get it from. Since Nathan had shared his secret, Richard told him how he had actually dreamt of a life of crime. He confessed to stealing from friends and family and to shoplifting. Upon hearing that news, Nathan said it made perfect sense. Nathan explained that he had studied the work of German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, specifically his theory of the Superman. Nathan believed that was a man who possessed extraordinary physical or intellectual abilities that meant that they were exempt from the laws that governed ordinary people. It was a pivotal moment in both men's lives. Richard had introduced the idea of being a criminal to Nathan, while Nathan added a reason why committing crime was okay. It's unknown if either of them would have gone on to become killers if they had never met, but their association definitely sped the process up at the very least. That night, Richard climbed into Nathan's bunk and the two had sex. Afterward, Nathan said that he would do anything that Richard wanted. Not long after they returned from Charlevoix, Richard changed schools and enrolled at the University of Michigan. Nathan also enrolled there, and the two began living in an apartment in Ann Arbor. Richard wanted a reason to get away from his parents, and he heard that that university was a party school. Nathan simply didn't want to be away from Richard. They went to the Loeb vacation estate the following year, and one night while they were in bed together, Hamlin Buckman walked in on them. Hamlin was a law student at the University of Chicago who was working for the Loebs that summer. Despite it being dark, he could tell they were both nude and quickly fled the room. The couple feared that the student might out them, and Richard and Nathan would later confess that they did start planning to kill Hamlin, but said that they never went through with it. Hamlin, on the other hand, believed that they did try to kill him. A few days after the incident, he went out sailing with Richard and Nathan on Pine Lake. In the middle of the voyage, Richard asked Hamlin, quote, "Do you swim?" To which the student replied no. Suddenly, the boat tipped over and both Richard and Nathan immediately swam for shore. It's assumed that Nathan and Richard were going to report a terrible accident once they made it to shore, but Hamlin made it back right after them. Hamlin explained to the shocked couple that he knew how to swim, he just didn't like to swim. Nathan and Richard apologized, claiming it was all an accident, but Hamlin didn't buy it. He talked to Richard's older brother Alan about the incident and what he had walked in on a few days prior, but Richard and Nathan denied it and Alan believed them. Then he fired Hamlin. The student was angry, so he told everybody about the incident when he got back to the University of Chicago. Richard thought that they would be insulated from the rumors since they were attending a different school, but once he arrived at the University of Michigan, he found out the hard way how fast word can travel. Nathan was delayed from going to the school for a few weeks due to illness, so when he arrived, Richard suggested they put some distance between them. When they were out in public, they should be polite, but not even act like good friends. Nathan agreed, but was not happy about the situation. It wasn't long before Richard was accepted into a fraternity, but it came with the stipulation that he stop associating with Nathan. He agreed, and Nathan returned to Chicago with his heart broken. They spent the next year not seeing much of each other. Richard graduated from the University of Michigan in 1923, making him the youngest graduate at the time at only 17 years old. He moved back to Chicago and enrolled in one class at the University of Chicago. While there, he would run into Nathan, and his ex-lover couldn't resist him, so he forgave Richard for everything. Richard would later admit that he was not interested in the sex. He was interested in the control over Nathan that it gave him. Their criminal activities escalated over time. By November of 1923, they had established a formal agreement. Nathan would comply with Richard's instructions without argument at specific times, and in exchange, they would engage in sexual activities. Initially, that arrangement was set at 3 times every 2 months, later changing to once per crime they had committed together. That pact formalized what had already been an unspoken dynamic in their relationship. Their criminal activities began with petty theft and vandalism, but those actions failed to satisfy their growing desire for notoriety. Disappointed by the lack of media attention, Nathan and Richard decided to plan and execute a sensational perfect crime that would garner public attention and confirm their self-perceived status as supermen. The planning of that perfect crime began in late 1923, with the two spending long hours discussing and refining the details. Nathan and Richard's decision to commit murder stemmed from a complex mix of intellectual arrogance and thrill-seeking. The pair, particularly Nathan, were fascinated by Nietzsche's concept of the Superman. They interpreted that idea to mean that exceptional individuals could transcend societal norms and ethics due to their superior intellect. That misguided belief led them to think that they were above the law and could commit crimes without consequences. They wanted to use that ability to commit a crime that would captivate the media and turn them into celebrities. The process of choosing a victim was methodical and chilling. Nathan and Richard established specific criteria for their target. They decided it had to be a young boy, as they believed boys were less supervised than girls and easier to overpower. The victim also needed to come from a wealthy family capable of paying a ransom. Initially, they considered several potential targets, including a former friend of Richard's and even their own family members. However, they ultimately left the final selection completely up to chance. They spent time observing students from the Harvard School for Boys where Nathan had been educated, looking for a suitable victim. Nathan and Richard spent 7 months meticulously planning every aspect of their crime. Their preparations were extensive and included creating false identities with elaborate backstories and setting up decoy bank accounts. They rented a car under the alias Morton D. Ballard to use during the kidnapping. The duo devised an intricate ransom collection plan involving a series of complex instructions to be communicated by phone. They typed a ransom note using a typewriter stolen from a fraternity house demanding $10,000 in old, unmarked bills. Their kill kit included rubber boots, tape, rope, and a chisel wrapped in tape. They also prepared hydrochloric acid to pour over the victim's body, making identification more difficult. Nathan and Richard even went so far as to scout the location where they planned to dispose of the body, choosing an area near Wolf Lake where Nathan often went birdwatching. Despite their extensive planning, neither Nathan nor Richard was enthusiastic about the actual act of murder. However, they deemed it necessary to minimize the risk of being identified as the kidnappers. On May 21, 1924, Nathan and Richard set their sinister plan in motion. The pair drove around the neighborhood for hours, searching for a suitable victim. They stopped by the Harvard School just as school was getting out, and Richard approached a 9-year-old boy and asked what he was doing. The boy responded that he was on his way to play baseball. Richard contemplated how to lure the boy into the car, but the kid ran off too quickly. The predators continued driving around, stalking the children in the neighborhood, looking for just the right victim. As they were about to give up, Richard spotted Bobby Franks, the 14-year-old son of a wealthy Chicago watch manufacturer. Bobby, who was walking home from school, became their chosen victim simply because he was, quote, the most likely-looking subject that came our way, as Nathan later confessed to the authorities. He was actually a second cousin to Richard and would occasionally play tennis on the court on the Loeb property. Seizing the opportunity, they lured the unsuspecting boy into their rented car under the pretense of discussing a tennis racket. Once inside the vehicle, the situation quickly turned violent. Richard, sitting in the back seat, struck Bobby several times in the head with the chisel. The boy, though severely injured, remained conscious and began to moan. Richard then dragged him into the back seat, stuffed a rag down his throat, and taped his mouth shut to silence him. The exact sequence of events during the murder remains disputed, but it's believed that Bobby died from suffocation rather than the blows to his head. After the killing, Nathan and Richard drove to their predetermined dumping spot near Wolf Lake in Hammond, Indiana, about 25 miles south of Chicago. They waited until nightfall to conceal their actions. In a chilling display of callousness, they stopped at a restaurant en route and bought hot dogs and root beers. At the chosen location, they dragged Bobby's body out of the car and carried it to a culvert along the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks. Nathan took the feet while Richard carried the head. They stripped the body completely and poured hydrochloric acid on the face and genitals to obscure the victim's identity. They included the genitals because Bobby was circumcised, which was unusual for non-Jewish Americans at that time and would narrow down the victim's identity. In their haste to dispose of their evidence, Nathan accidentally dropped his eyeglasses near the body, a crucial mistake that would later lead to their undoing. Robert Franks was born on September 19, 1909 to Jacob and Flora Franks. Jacob had been the president of the Rockford Watch Company, a company that made pocket watches until the company closed in 1915. Robert was the youngest child and Flora called him Baby, though everyone else called him Bobby. He was a good student who had recently participated in a school debate about capital punishment. In the 1920s, the death penalty was a pretty popular punishment amongst society when it came to crimes like murder. Bobby had argued against the death penalty, saying that only God was permitted to take a human life. After the debate, he told his parents that he wanted to become a lawyer. Flora was open about Bobby being her favorite, and that's why she was so concerned when he didn't come home after school. It was 6:30 p.m. and it started to rain, so it was unlikely that the boy would still be outside playing. Jacob went across the street to see if he was playing tennis at the Loebs, but he wasn't there. He walked around the neighborhood looking for his son, but when he was nowhere to be found, Jacob started getting concerned as well. The Franks sat down to dinner, hoping Bobby would walk through the door in time for dessert, but after sitting at the table and uncomfortably looking at the food for a while, they knew something was wrong. Jacob called a neighbor and they went down to the school to make sure Bobby hadn't gotten locked inside. They found a basement window that was unlocked, so they squeezed inside and started walking the halls calling out Bobby's name. While they were there, back at the Frank house, the phone rang. In an effort to further complicate their crime and throw off investigators, Nathan and Richard implemented an elaborate ransom scheme. They had spent months planning that aspect, creating false identities and devising complex instructions for the ransom collection. Nathan, using the alias George Johnson, called the Frank house and asked for Mr. Frank. Flora had answered the phone and told the man on the other line that he wasn't there. The voice then explained that their son had been kidnapped and they would receive further instructions in the morning. Flora asked who the caller was and he said Johnson before hanging up. Flora screamed and passed out. Jacob and his friend returned home to find her laying on the rug near the phone. After assisting her to bed, the men decided that alerting the police might cause the kidnapper to do something drastic, and Jacob didn't want to do anything that would put his son in any more danger. Not knowing that the boy was already dead, he sat by the phone, hoping the kidnapper would call back with his ransom demands. The morning after the murder, the kidnappers mailed a typed ransom note to the Franks family demanding $10,000 in unmarked bills. The note read, quote, "Dear Sir, as you no doubt know by this time, your son has been kidnapped. Allow us to assure you that he is at present well and safe. You need fear no physical harm for him, provided you live up carefully to the following instructions, and such others as you will receive by future communications. Should you, however, disobey any of our instructions even slightly, his death will be the penalty." The note went on to give instructions, including not contacting the police, to obtain $10,000 in old bills, $2,020 bills, and $8,050 bills, to place the money in a cigar box, and to prepare to get a call after 1 p.m. that day. The note went on to say, quote, "As a final word of warning, this is strictly a commercial proposition, and we are prepared to put our threat into execution should we have reasonable grounds to believe that you have committed an infraction of the above instructions. However, should you carefully follow out our instructions to the letter, we can assure you that your son will be safely returned to you within 6 hours of our receipt of the money." That note was written and delivered by Richard and Nathan, fully aware that everything in it was a lie. While the Frank family was reeling from the news of their son's kidnapping, Richard and Nathan were disposing of the evidence of their perfect crime. They burned the clothes they had worn and scrubbed out the interior of the rental car. They even destroyed the typewriter that Nathan had used to write the ransom notes. The whole time, they patted themselves on the back, believing that the authorities would be baffled by the murder and would never be able to unravel the truth. Nathan retrieved the other notes he had typed out, and after returning the rental car, they drove around in Nathan's Willie's night and planted the notes at locations they would eventually try to lead the Franks to. They planted notes with instructions on where to take the money, like a treasure hunt around the city, and then they used a payphone to make another call to the Franks. That call would put in motion a series of events that was never intended to return Bobby to his family safe and sound. It would be their plan to shock the world and show how much smarter they were than the authorities. However, their carefully laid plans quickly unraveled. The body was discovered sooner than they anticipated, making their ransom ploy ineffective. On the morning of May 22nd, a mill worker named Tony Minky decided to cut through a wooded area near Wolf Lake on his way to a watch repair shop. As he crossed some railroad tracks, he walked by a culvert that would allow water to flow between Wolf Lake and a smaller lake under the tracks. As he glanced down, he saw what looked like something floating in the water. He climbed down into the culvert to investigate, and once he was closer, he realized that he was looking at a foot sticking out of the water. Tony scrambled out of the culvert and waved down a couple of men who were passing by on a gas-powered handcar. One of those men ran into the water and pulled out what ended up being a naked boy, clearly deceased. They laid the boy in the grass and covered his body with a tarp. They also noticed a pair of horn-rimmed glasses near the culvert. One of the railmen put the glasses in his pocket, and the 3 men loaded the body onto the handcar, transporting it to the rail station. From there, the police were alerted and a sergeant arrived and collected the body and the glasses. When the sergeant dropped the body off at the funeral home, he handed the glasses to the director, assuming they belonged to the unidentified boy. In the afternoon of the 22nd, Nathan made a second call to dictate the first set of instructions for the ransom payment. By then, news of a body being discovered had reached the media along with information about the kidnapping. Reporters were at the Franks' home looking for interviews, and some of them had made the connection between the body and the abduction. The Franks didn't believe that the body found belonged to Bobby because reports said the boy wore glasses. In an effort to be sure, they called Flora's brother, Edwin Gresham, and asked him to drive to the funeral home and identify the body. If it was in fact Bobby, he was instructed to call them back and simply say yes. Hours had gone by and they had not received word from Edwin. So when the kidnapper called the house, they assumed that Bobby was still alive and they could get him back by following the instructions. The man on the phone said that a yellow cab would be arriving at their house soon. He instructed them to get in and go to a drugstore on East 63rd Street. There they would find the next set of instructions. Then the man hung up. Suddenly Jacob panicked. He had already forgotten the address. His mind was all over the place, and the whole morning had felt like a fever dream. He racked his brain but couldn't pull the address out of his head. Suddenly the phone rang again, and Jacob was hopeful that it was the kidnapper so he could get the instructions repeated. He picked up the phone and put it to his ear. Then he heard his brother-in-law say one word: yes. The acid hadn't worked enough to obscure Bobby's face, and his uncle knew it was him. It wasn't long after that the doorbell rang and there was a cab driver there ready to pick someone up. The Franks grilled him. "Who sent you? Where are you supposed to take them?" The driver said he was called by a Mr. Franks and he didn't give a destination address. Jacob thought about going with the cab driver, but he didn't know where they were going and it was pointless anyway. Bobby was dead. As Nathan and Richard were driving around, trying to keep their plan in motion, they spotted a newspaper that had the headline, "Body of Boy Found in Swamp." That was when the pair gave up on their plan of receiving the ransom and went back to their normal lives, like nothing had happened. Even though the boy's body had been found, they believed they had made him difficult to identify and they had no connection to the crime, so they thought they were in the clear. Nothing could have been further from the truth. The discovery of key evidence played a crucial role in unraveling the case. The pair of horn-rimmed tortoiseshell glasses found with Bobby Frank's body became a pivotal clue. Once Bobby was identified, it was clear that the glasses didn't belong to him. The next logical conclusion was that they belonged to the killer. The glasses, which had a common prescription, had an unusual hinge that could be traced to a single Chicago optometrist. The optometrist had written only 3 such prescriptions, one of which was for Nathan Leopold. When questioned about the glasses, Nathan claimed he must have lost them during one of his frequent birding expeditions. When asked to demonstrate how the glasses might have fallen out of his pockets, though, he failed to dislodge them despite several purposeful trips. As the police interrogation intensified, both Nathan and Richard initially provided alibis. They claimed to have spent the day of May 21st driving around, picking up girls and birdwatching in Jackson Park. However, their stories began to unravel as inconsistencies emerged. Nathan's chauffeur, Sven Englund, came forward in an attempt to help his young charge. In an effort to show that the boy had been home on the day of the kidnap and murder, he told the police that Nathan's car had been in the garage all afternoon on May 21st, which it had. Then, to make matters worse, Sven's wife also confirmed that the Willie's night had been in the garage on the 21st. Since the boys had claimed to be out picking up girls in the car, the help that Sven was trying to give inadvertently shattered their alibi. Faced with mounting evidence, Richard was the first to crack under pressure. After being confronted with the facts gathered against them, he asked to speak with State's Attorney Robert Crowe in private. At 4 a.m. on May 31st, Richard gave his official confession. Nathan, initially skeptical when told of Richard's confession, eventually realized the truth as prosecutors revealed specific details Richard had mentioned. At 4:20 a.m., Nathan also provided his statement. The confessions of Nathan and Richard marked a turning point in the investigation. Their statements corroborated most of the facts in the case, but each blamed the other for the actual killing of Bobby Franks. The trial of Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb became a media spectacle, drawing attention from across the nation. The renowned criminal defense attorney Clarence Darrow led the defense team, taking on the case due to his strong opposition to capital punishment. Ironically, a view that was shared by the victim. Darrow made a strategic decision to enter a plea of guilty, hoping to convince the judge to impose life sentences instead of the death penalty. Darrow's defense strategy centered on the defendant's youth, genetic inheritance, and external influences that led to their crime. In his impassioned plea, which lasted over a day, Darrow argued against the death penalty, describing it as atavistic and rooting back to the beast in the jungle. He painted a vivid picture of the possible consequences of execution, reminding the judge of, quote, taking 2 boys, one 18 and the other 19, irresponsible, weak, diseased, penning them in a cell, checking off the days and hours and minutes until they're taken out and hanged. The judge announced his decision 2 weeks after Darrow's plea. While acknowledging that his judgment couldn't be affected by the causes of crime, he stated that the defendant's age and the potential benefits to criminology from future study of them influenced his decision. On September 10, 1924, he sentenced both Nathan and Richard to life imprisonment for the murder with an additional 99 years for the kidnapping. Nathan's time in prison was marked by intellectual pursuits and efforts at rehabilitation. He taught in the prison school, mastered foreign languages, worked as an X-ray technician in the prison hospital, and reorganized the prison library. Nathan also volunteered to be tested with an experimental malaria vaccine and designed a new system of prison education. In 1932, Nathan and Richard opened a school for prisoners, teaching classes and handling administrative work. That endeavor allowed them to use their intellectual gifts constructively for the first time since their incarceration. However, their partnership was cut short when Richard was fatally attacked by a fellow inmate in 1936. James Day attacked Richard with a straight razor in the shower on January 28th. James claimed that Richard had tried to sexually assault him and he defended himself, but Richard sustained more than 50 wounds and had his throat slashed. He was 30 years old. After serving 33 years, Nathan Leopold was released from prison in 1958. He later reflected on his freedom, stating that it was, quote, "the greatest single thing that could have happened in my life." He was given a job as a medical technician in Puerto Rico, where he remained until he died of a heart attack on August 29, 1971. He was 66 years old. Nathan Leopold's journey from a privileged prodigy to a convicted murderer and eventually to a rehabilitated ex-convict offers a complex narrative of redemption and personal growth. His life in prison, marked by intellectual pursuits and efforts to help fellow inmates, demonstrates the potential for change even in the aftermath of heinous crimes. The case continues to fascinate, serving as a cautionary tale to warn against letting unchecked ambition and misguided notions of superiority turn you into a monster. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.